Have you ever felt like a spectator at a grand show, applauding the talent on stage, with no idea of the psychological prison lurking behind the scenes? Some of the brightest stars we adore are, in fact, the loneliest, living under a control so subtle and powerful, it becomes invisible to the public eye. Welcome to The Truth, Dark Psychology. Today, we will unravel the threads of one of the most complex webs of manipulation ever witnessed in the spotlight. The story of a pop icon who had the world at her feet, but not control over her own life. If you seek to understand the shadows of the human mind behind the curtains of fame, subscribe, like the video, and prepare to question everything you thought you knew. The creation of a global icon rarely happens by chance. It is often a meticulous project of psychological engineering. From a very young age, the figure the world would come to know as the Princess of Pop was molded for perfection. Every smile, every dance step, every note sung was part of an intense training to become a flawless product, the personification of the American dream. This pressure to be extraordinary, to never fail, installs a dangerous mental program in a child's mind. The idea that love and acceptance are conditional on performance, a fertile ground for future manipulation, where affection becomes a reward to be endlessly earned. This journey towards stardom was, in fact, the programmed loss of childhood. While other children played, she rehearsed. While others discovered their identities, hers was constructed by agents, executives, and crucially, by her own family. The transition from daughter to financial asset is one of the darkest dynamics in the entertainment world. Parental control, disguised as care and protection, establishes an unequal power dynamic where the child learns to associate obedience with safety and success. A lesson that would leave her vulnerable for decades, unable to distinguish between guidance and domination. The psychological conditioning for constant performance creates a specific type of public personality. She learned to be charismatic, approachable, and perpetually sweet, not necessarily because that was her innate nature, but because that was the role she was assured the world would love. This process of dissociation, where the public persona becomes increasingly distant from the true self, is a survival mechanism. However, it also creates an internal vacuum, a confusion about who you really are when the lights go out, making external validation the only compass for self-esteem. Vulnerability to future manipulation was cemented in these early years by being programmed to please and obey authority figures like parents and mentors. She was deprived of the opportunity to develop healthy boundaries and a critical sense of others' intentions. The subtle control exerted over her choices, friendships, and even thoughts was normalized as the price of fame. This created the perfect scenario for a much more explicit and legal control, like a conservatorship, to be imposed later with little initial resistance. As the pattern of submission was already deeply ingrained in her psyche. Finally, we cannot ignore our role, the public, in solidifying this persona. We avidly consumed the image of the pure virgin, then the sensual pop star, and then the young mother. We demanded authenticity, but punished any deviation from the narrative we created for her. This collective pressure acts as an external reinforcement for the internal manipulators. They could always point to public expectations as justification for their strict rules, creating a prison where the fans, unknowingly, helped polish the bars of the gilded cage they themselves had built. Charisma is one of the most potent tools of influence, but in the wrong hands or in an environment of control, it can become a double-edged sword. Her charisma was undeniable, a mix of vulnerability, energy, and a sweetness that seemed genuine. This combination made her magnetic to millions. However, from the perspective of dark psychology, this very sweetness became the perfect camouflage for the control exerted over her. For her controllers, her image as a fragile and lovable girl was the ideal justification for the need to protect her, a euphemism for dominating her, because who would dare question the intentions of those taking care of someone so delicate? The discrepancy between her onstage performance and her offstage passivity is a fertile ground for psychological analysis. On stage, she was power, control, and seduction. Off stage, especially in interviews and public appearances, she often seemed shy, almost infantilized. This duality raises a disturbing question. Was the charisma a controlled performance? Was it a permitted outlet where she could express a power denied to her in real life? Or was it the very manifestation of her sweetness that manipulators used to keep her in a state of emotional dependence, always seeking approval? Being universally perceived as sweet and kind in the ruthless world of fame is like bleeding in an ocean full of sharks. Predatory psychology teaches that extreme kindness, devoid of firm boundaries, is often interpreted as weakness. Individuals with narcissistic and manipulative tendencies are drawn to this trait, as they see an opportunity to exert control without meeting resistance. Her sweetness, instead of being her strength, was transformed into the lock of her own prison, a quality that others used to justify why she needed to be guided and managed in every aspect of her life. Manipulation, through conditional affection, is a classic and devastating tactic. Imagine being praised and rewarded only when you are compliant, docile, and profitable. Any attempt to express a contrary opinion, to show anger, or to make an autonomous decision was met with punishment, whether in the form of silence, withdrawal of privileges, or emotional invalidation. This cycle of intermittent reinforcement kept her trapped in a state of constantly seeking approval, especially from her father, turning love and care into tools of deep psychological coercion. Ultimately, her public image was the most powerful weapon used to discredit her. Whenever she tried to rebel or show signs of distress, her actions were framed as emotional instability or madness, contrasting with the America's sweetheart image they themselves had built. See, they could say to the world and the courts, "She's not the sweet person you think she is. She's out of control and needs us." Thus, the same charisma that made her famous was skillfully twisted to become proof of her supposed incapacity, sealing her fate under the yoke of her manipulators. To understand the depth of the manipulation at play, we need to look beyond them. Family drama and analyze the conservatorship as an instrument of absolute psychological control. Legally, a conservatorship is intended to protect individuals who are genuinely incapable of making decisions for themselves. However, in her case, this legal tool was transformed into an architecture of imprisonment. Imagine waking up one day to discover that you no longer have the right to decide who to talk to, where to go, or how to spend the money you yourself earned. It is the complete nullification of your identity and autonomy as a human being. Gaslighting, the tactic of making someone doubt their own sanity, was the foundation of this prison. For years, she was systematically told that her perceptions were wrong. Her emotions were exaggerated, and her mind was not reliable. Every protest was seen as further proof of her instability. When this narrative is reinforced by authority, figures, lawyers, and even the judicial system, the victim begins to internalize the lie. The conservatorship not only controlled her physically, it was designed to colonize her mind, making her believe that she truly needed that cage for her own good. Financial control was undoubtedly the most brutal mechanism of her captivity. Money represents power, independence, and freedom of choice. By depriving her of access to her own fortune, her conservators kept her in a state of childlike dependence. She was one of the most successful artists on the planet, generating millions of dollars. Yet she reportedly received a meager allowance and had to ask for permission to make trivial purchases. This is not about protecting assets. It's about using money as a leash, a constant reminder of who is in command and of her total powerlessness. The tactic of isolation is fundamental in any scenario of abuse and control, and here it was applied with surgical precision. Her contacts were monitored, her phone was bugged, and her friendships were controlled. The goal of isolation is to cut the victim off from any external support system, that might validate their feelings or offer a different perspective. By keeping her surrounded only by those who benefited from the conservatorship, her controllers created an echo chamber where the only reality that existed was the one they presented. This generates a total dependence on the abuser, not just for physical needs, but also for the interpretation of reality. Living for over a decade under this systematic nullification of her will has an immense psychological cost, known as learned helplessness. After repeated attempts to fight and fail, the victim's brain can simply surrender, accepting that resistance is futile. Passivity and depression set in not as a personality trait, but as a survival response to an environment from which there is no escape. The conservatorship was not just a legal restriction. It was a psychological re-engineering to break her spirit and ensure her compliance through exhaustion and despair. The year 2007 is often remembered by the media and the public as the meltdown of a pop star, a macabre entertainment spectacle. However, under the lens of dark psychology, these events must be re-examined not as a bout of madness, but as a desperate cry for help and an act of rebellion against unbearable psychological pressure. Shaving her head, attacking a paparazzi's car. These were not random acts. They were a violent attempt to destroy the image that imprisoned her, a symbolic attack on the Britney Spears product that was consuming her. It was her psyche fighting to breathe, trying to shatter the perfect facade by force. The media's role during this period was that of an accelerant and accomplice to the manipulative forces. Every tear, every erratic act was hunted, captured, and sold for millions, turning her pain into a consumer product. The paparazzi were not just observers. They were active participants in her torment, provoking her to get a reaction that could be monetized. Psychologically, this creates a vicious cycle. The harassment causes distress. The distress is filmed as instability, and the instability justifies even more harassment and control. The media, in its pursuit of profit, became an extension of the abuse she was suffering. Watching the cry for help be universally interpreted as madness is one of the cruelest forms of psychological invalidation. Instead of asking, why is she acting this way? The world simply labeled her crazy. For someone already in a state of extreme vulnerability, this public condemnation serves as a devastating confirmation of their worst insecurities, often planted by the manipulators themselves. It's the perfect weapon to silence a victim. If you scream, no one will believe you. They will only see proof that you need to be silenced for your own good. The 2007 meltdown, instead of being seen as a moment for genuine intervention and help, became the perfect pretext her future conservators needed. They could use the sensationalist images as irrefutable proof in the courts and in public opinion that she was incapable of caring for herself. The crisis she faced, exacerbated by relentless persecution, was the golden opportunity for the subtle control that had always existed to be formalized and made absolute. Her rebellion, her cry for freedom, was the very key that locked the door of her cage for 13 years. The trauma of having your darkest, most vulnerable moments not only exposed but turned into a global joke and entertainment leaves indelible scars. It teaches the victim that their pain doesn't matter, that their suffering is a source of amusement for others. This massive public humiliation can lead to profound post-traumatic stress, paranoia, and a severe distrust of the outside world. Her televised fall was not just a media event. It was a ritual of public humiliation that solidified her victim status and justified the complete takeover of her life. If this analysis is opening your eyes to the complex webs of manipulation that can hide behind even the biggest smiles, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your suggestion in the comments for the next video is very important to us. Who else should we analyze through the lens of dark psychology? There's a primary psychological vulnerability that resides in the heart of most parents: the deep instinctive fear of losing their children. The manipulators around our star knew this and exploited this wound with calculated cruelty. Motherhood, which should have been a source of strength and purpose, was transformed into the most powerful tool of emotional blackmail against her. The threat, whether explicit or implicit, that she could lose access to her children was the final whip to ensure her total submission and cooperation with the conservatorship system. The narrative of the unfit mother was carefully constructed and fed by the media and her legal opponents. Every incident, no matter how minor, was amplified and used as proof of her supposed parental incompetence. Driving with her child on her lap, for instance, a mistake many parents have made, was turned into a national scandal. This smear campaign was not aimed at protecting the children. Its purpose was to break her spirit by targeting the most sacred aspect of her identity. By attacking her as a mother, they attacked her on a fundamental level, making her easier to control. The use of children as pawns in a power game is one of the darkest tactics in the manipulation handbook. It forces the victim into an impossible choice: fight for your own autonomy and risk losing your children, or sacrifice your freedom to ensure you can continue to be a mother. For most parents, the choice is obvious. This tactic creates a state of paralysis and despair where the victim feels cornered, forced to tolerate the intolerable to protect those they love most. It is a form of psychological torture that leaves few options but surrender. The psychological impact of having your capability as a mother constantly questioned, judged, and used as a weapon is immeasurable. It generates chronic anxiety, self-doubt, and an overwhelming feeling of powerlessness. Every interaction with her children becomes tinged with the fear that she might do something wrong that will be used against her. This robs the spontaneity and joy from motherhood, turning it into a stressful performance under constant surveillance. The control was not just about her finances or career. It infiltrated the most intimate core of her existence, her role as a mother. This strategy reveals the calculating and empathy-deprived nature of her controllers. Targeting the mother-child relationship is to cross a moral line that exposes the true nature of the abuse at play. It was not about concern, but about power. By turning her maternal love into her greatest weakness, they ensured they would have the ultimate control over her actions. She could endure the loss of her fortune, her fame, and her freedom, but the prospect of losing her children was the chain that kept her shackled in silence for so long. The emergence of the #Free Britney movement is a fascinating case study in mass psychology and the power of collective empathy. For years, the signs were there, but they were ignored or ridiculed. The movement gave voice to a growing suspicion, connecting the dots and challenging the official narrative. Psychologically, the movement was driven by a strong sense of perceived injustice. Fans who grew up with her felt a parasocial connection and the need to protect the idol they saw being publicly wronged. It was a revolt against the institutionalized gaslighting that everyone had witnessed. One of the driving forces of the movement was psychological projection. Many supporters saw in her struggle a reflection of their own experiences of feeling powerless, silenced, or controlled, whether by family dynamics, abusive relationships, or oppressive systems. Her fight became their fight. By fighting for her freedom, they were symbolically fighting for their own agency and validation. This deep identification transformed a fandom into an army of activists, demonstrating how an individual's story can catalyze a collective consciousness about universal issues of power and abuse. However, every light casts a shadow. The intensity of the movement, while well-intentioned, can also be seen as a double-edged sword. The same massive attention that helped expose the injustice also placed her life and trauma under an even bigger microscope. Every step of her journey to freedom was dissected, analyzed, and commented on by millions. This adds a complex layer of pressure. She could no longer fight for herself in private. Her recovery and her anger became a public spectacle, with expectations and opinions coming from all sides. The hashtag Free Britney movement represents a landmark moment in digital culture, where mass mobilization on social media managed to challenge and eventually topple a powerful legal and narrative structure. It was proof that a crowd united by a cause can effectively combat misinformation and the control exerted by authority figures. They refused to accept the crazy star story and instead rewrote the script, casting her as a victim of a corrupt system. It was a victory of public perception over private manipulation. Despite the positive outcome, her freedom came with the burden of being a symbol. She is not just a woman recovering from a profound trauma. She is the face of a global movement. This can be incredibly empowering, but also deeply exhausting. The pressure to be the perfect survivor, or to use her platform in a way the public approves of, continues to be a form of external control. The physical cage is gone, but the prison of public perception and mass expectation still casts a long shadow over her newfound freedom. The saga of this pop star's rise, fall, and eventual liberation leaves us with deep and disturbing lessons about human nature. The first and most shocking lesson is about the thin line between love and control within family dynamics. Her story is an extreme example of how the desire to protect can morph into a desire to possess, and how financial power can corrupt the most sacred bonds. It forces us to question the motivations behind care and to recognize the signs of control when it disguises itself as family love and protection. The second lesson is a masterclass in gaslighting and the fragility of individual reality. Her story demonstrates how powerful institutions, including the law and the media, can conspire to invalidate a person's experience, making them doubt their own mind. If this could happen to one of the most famous and wealthy women in the world, it can happen to anyone. It teaches us the importance of trusting our own perception and the dangerous effectiveness of psychological manipulation when executed systematically and by authority figures. Perhaps the most important lesson is about our perception of the victim. Society often expects victims to be passive, sad, and docile. Her moments of anger, her strange social media posts, are not signs of instability, but rather manifestations of a justified rage and the rediscovery of a long-silenced voice. Her imperfection as a survivor is, in fact, the most authentic proof of her struggle. She teaches us that healing is not linear and that anger can be a vital and sane force against injustice. Her story is also a dark, cautionary tale about the illusion of fame. It shows us that success and wealth are not synonymous with power or happiness. In fact, they can become the very tools others use to imprison you. Fame made her a target, and her wealth the reason to keep her in captivity. It's a perverse inversion of the dream of success, revealing that the most secure cage is not made of iron, but of gold, public acclaim, and multi-million-dollar contracts. Finally, her ongoing journey to reclaim her life and her narrative is a lesson in resilience, but also a sober reminder of the permanent scars left by prolonged psychological abuse. Freedom from the conservatorship was only the first step. The real battle, that of healing a mind and spirit fractured by 13 years of control, will take much longer and will happen far from the courtrooms, in the silence of her own conscience. She teaches us that the price of freedom is the eternal fight to ensure that your voice, once found, is never silenced again. The story we analyze today is a powerful reminder that appearances can be deadly deceptive. What are your thoughts on the control tactics used in this case? Leave your opinion in the comments. We really want to know what you think. Don't forget to subscribe to The Truth, Dark Psychology, and hit the notification bell, because with every video, we will continue to pull back the veil that hides the darkest truths of human nature. Until next time, question everything.